The Ministry of Finance and the Public Service presents Let's Talk Finance, a feature exploring the various elements of the economic program.
Welcome again to Let's Talk Finance here on Nationwide 90 FM. My name is George Davis. My guest this morning is a man you've heard on this program before. He's Trevor Anderson. He's the acting principal director in the Fiscal Management Policy Unit at the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. Trevor, the estimates of expenditure tabled recently from the perspective of I don't like to say ordinary folk because people bridle at that descriptor, but the everyday person, the person who's not steeped in finance, the person who's not a journalist on the business desk, the person who isn't as comfortable with the numbers and the permutations and the nomenclature and the descriptors related to finance. They want to understand what is here, what is at stake. So from an overall perspective, what does it have in store for the fiscal year ahead?
Good morning, George. Good morning to your listeners. I'm very happy to be here again in terms of providing explanations to the public on fiscal policy and the budget in particular. Let me start by posing the question, what is the budget? So the budget brings together the estimates of expenditure, which was tabled on the 14th of February, and it also brings together the revenue estimates. Let's talk in simple layman language. The budget is about your income, and it's about how you spend that income. So the fancy term we hear, estimates of expenditure, you can liken it to the list of expenses that you, the individual, face. The light bill, the water bill, food, gas for your car, repairs for your car, school fees. All of these line items will fall broadly into two categories, recurrent or repetitive expenses and capital, which relates to expenditure which is supposed to improve the infrastructure of your house, where I mentioned earlier the repairs of your car. So broadly speaking, you have recurring costs, you have capital costs, and when you juxtapose that against what you earn, your income, you either end up with a balance, in other words, you spend everything, you end up with a surplus, you have a little savings, or you're above your regular income, which means you would have had to have borrowed resources to finance that expenditure. So that is what the national budget is. It is similar to the budget for the household, and how it is managed is critical for the sustainability of the income and well-being of the family, the income and the well-being of the nation.
When you say recurrent expenditure then, and you use the household bundle, are you saying that, all right, you know that the electricity bill has to be paid every month, the water bill has to be paid every month, Flow or Digital, depending on which service provider you have, they have to be paid every month for the internet and the cable. And you're talking also about the fact that lunch money has to be provided every week. So those are the recurrent expenditures in the household.
Yes.
So ratchet that, amplify that now to say what are the recurrent expenditures from a government perspective.
So the recurrent expenses from a government perspective, from the budget, national budget perspective, it includes two general categories. One is the payment of wages and salaries, and we call that compensation. The other general category of recurrent, we call it programs, and that includes all other recurrent, the light for the ministries, departments of agencies, the water, purchase of stationery, purchase of supplies, including food supplies. You may hire a canteen concessionaire.
Yes.
All these are part of programs. Any recurrent expenditure which you have to incur in the delivery, for the delivery of service, that falls under programs. And compensation, as I mentioned, speaks for itself. It's the remuneration of for staff so that they in turn now can apply their income to their own personal situation.
All right. So for capital expenditure now, and I want you to split between capital A and capital B as you go along with the explanation. But let's start again with the household.
Yes.
So the capital expenditure would be okay. So you know what? You're adding a little room at the back of the house.
Yes.
So that's capital expenditure
That's
in the
capital
household.
expenditure.
You're putting a grill on the front of the SUV because you can't afford if it crashes for it to mash up. So you're putting something on the front to ensure that if you have a collision, you will be okay.
Yes.
So that's capital expenditure
That's
for the
capital
household again.
expenditure.
You say, you know what? You have a little shop and you are going to build 5 extra shelves to hold some more canned foods because you're trying to expand into selling baked bean and tin mackerel and all those things that you never sold before.
Yes.
That's capital expenditure, household.
Yes.
Give me capital expenditure from the government perspective now.
Capital expenditure for the government now is, in a national sense, is the purchase of equipment. Can be vehicles. Classic example would be the purchase of vehicles for the police force.
Yes.
The purchase of security equipment.
Both for the Marine Police.
Both for the Marine Police,
Yes.
equipment for the Army. You can look at development of infrastructure, for example, renovation works for or building of new police stations,
Yes.
new barracks for the military. All these fall under capital expenditure. Anything which relates to the long-term improvement in the well-being,
Yes.
that is what we refer to as capital expenditure. And I draw attention, for example, one of the things listed on the capital is the PATH program,
Yes.
where we issue out cash grants
Yes.
and other such related assistance. And some persons might wonder, why is that capital? Well, if you're looking on it in terms of they're going to use the cash grants to pay for everyday expenses, that's one issue. But what we're actually doing is we're providing assistance in building human capital.
There you go.
So that is another form of capital expenditure.
So question for you. If
Yes.
it is that whenever it rains, there is land slippage along the Lawrence Tavern Main Road. Keep the language together, George.
Yes.
And you say, you know what? We are going to build a retaining wall in 1920 fiscal year.
Yes.
That's also an example of capital expenditure.
Capital expenditure, yes.
And the residents in Arrow Walk in St. Mary, they've needed a bridge for years. And finally, they're going to get a bridge to replace the rope thing they were using to
Yes.
cross the river.
Yes.
That building of that bridge, that's also capital
That's
expenditure.
also capital expenditure. And just to simplify it for the layman, capital expenditure is something which you don't undertake regularly.
Yes. So you're not going to build a bridge every fiscal year in
build a
Arrow
bridge-
Walk.
Exactly.
Yes.
Unless, of course, it's poor workmanship.
There you go.
You expect the structure to stand up and meet certain standards. Recurrent is something which you're going to be incurring fairly frequently, whether it's once a month,
Yes.
once a week, once every 6 months. Those are recurrent type expenditures. And I should point out, George, that one of the changes made in the estimates of expenditure this year is we have done away with the capital A and the capital B nomenclature for
There
the,
you
for the
go. I
capital
was going to ask
budget.
about that. Yes.
And it was felt that the distinction no longer was really meaningful.
Yeah, it wasn't relevant anymore.
Wasn't relevant anymore. The other key change, George, is that principal payments, which were normally housed under capital, that has been taken out and given a new head.
Yes.
So no longer is principal repayment on debt
Yes.
called capital, because it can be confusing
Yes.
to the person looking on. Whoa, the capital expenditure looks large,
Yes.
but the lion's share of it
Is going
would
to-
have been the principal repayment.
Yeah.
So we have separated it out. So whatever you see in the estimates from 1920 going forward,
Yes.
called capital,
Yes.
is capital in its truest sense.
Capital in straight sense. All right. So the man going home on the bus with the woman sitting beside him, they are listening to the news. And the newsreader says, so the Ministry of Education has gotten let's not even go to the Ministry of Education. Let's go to the usual ministry that gets the lion's share of the budget, the Ministry of Finance. First of all, they always wonder, why is it, the man is wondering, why is it that the Ministry of Finance's allocation is so great? And they say that portion for recurrent, that portion for capital. Is it that more people work at the Ministry of Finance than anywhere else? Is that the Ministry of Finance has more expenses? Is it because it's a Ministry of Finance and they pay other ministries? I'm just saying to you what they may be saying in their heads,
Yes.
trying to justify and answer the question as to why the ministry gets such a large allocation, the Ministry of Finance. Explain why it is that in any budget, the finance ministry will get the lion's share. Why?
In any budget, the Ministry of Finance will get the lion's share, and it's not because we have overpaid employees, and it's not because the Ministry of Finance sees itself as the primary ministry. And what I want to say is, what's driving that higher nominal figure that we see in the estimates is the fact that the Ministry of Finance is responsible for dealing with the servicing of the debt.
Yes.
So the interest and the principal payments that I mentioned before, those two account for 34% of the estimates of expenditure in 1920.
Yes.
And if you remember, George, just a few years ago, it slipped me to check, but the debt service on the budget was much larger. It was in excess of 50%.
Yes.
So we have made strides, we have made significant headway in reducing that, and we're not flinching away from reducing debt servicing, because to the extent that debt servicing is reduced, it means more resources becomes available for capital and especially the development of our human capital.
Yeah.
It's well said that, the future of a nation lies in its children.
Yes.
And we need to pay attention to our primary education, the pre-primary level. That's where resources are sorely needed and
Yes.
need to be pumped.
Yes. When someone hears in the budget, Trevor, the term appropriations,
Yes.
what is being talked about?
Appropriations is a fancy term for sharing, allocation. So it speaks to resources shared out, appropriated out across ministries, departments, and agencies.
Yes.
One of the big allocations or appropriations, continuing from 1819 and certainly 1920, is the appropriation to the Ministry of National Security.
Yes.
Because outside of debt servicing, the next major line item in terms of expense relates to the fight to keep crime under control.
Hold it right there, Trevor.
Sure.
We're going to continue this in the next installment of this program. That's all the time we have this week for Let's Talk Finance. I ended it right there because I wanted to be intrigued enough to join us next week when Trevor dives into the explanation about appropriations and how the National Security Ministry, how does it command the allocation that it was given in the 1920 estimates. That's it for the program this week.
That was Let's Talk Finance, brought to you by the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service.